Long before North Carolina became a state, long before its cities stretched along rivers or its mountains cast shadows over forests, the land was alive with the presence of Native American nations. Among the most prominent were the Cherokee, Tuscarora, and Catawba peoples, each with their own complex societies, spiritual beliefs, and trade networks. These communities had thrived for centuries, their lives intertwined with the rich landscapes of the Atlantic coast, the Piedmont, and the Appalachian Mountains. The coastal plains, with their rivers, sounds, and estuaries, provided abundant resources. Native Americans fished, hunted, and farmed, cultivating corn, beans, and squash in fertile river valleys. Forests offered timber and game, while the Atlantic Ocean brought fish and shellfish, sustaining communities with a balance that would endure for generations. These societies were not static. They traded, waged war, and formed alliances, creating a dynamic cultural and political landscape across the region that would later become North Carolina. European exploration began in the 16th century, though permanent settlement would not take root for over 100 years. The first notable attempts were by the English, who sought to establish colonies along the Atlantic seaboard. One of the most famous early experiments was the Lost Colony of Roanoke, founded in 1587 under the leadership of John White. Its settlers mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind only the cryptic word, Croton, carved into a post. This enigma remains one of the earliest and most intriguing chapters in North Carolina's colonial history. The early 17th century brought renewed English interest, as well as competition from other European powers, including the Spanish and the French. By the 1650s and 1660s, settlers were moving inland from the coast, establishing small farms and communities. These early settlements were modest, often isolated, and reliant on local resources for survival. Tobacco became a critical crop, drawing settlers to the fertile lands of the coastal plain and eventually shaping the economy and society of the region. By the early 18th century, the colony of North Carolina began to formalize under British control. It was originally part of the province of Carolina, granted by King Charles II to 8 lords proprietors in 1663. North Carolina's rugged terrain and dispersed population made governance difficult, but the colony steadily grew. Towns such as Bath, New Bern, and Edenton became important centers of trade, administration, and culture. Edenton, in particular, emerged as a hub for politics and commerce, showcasing the growing influence of the colony in the Atlantic world. Economically, North Carolina developed along 2 distinct paths. The coastal region, with its deep rivers and access to the Atlantic, became oriented toward trade and plantation agriculture. Rice, indigo, and later tobacco dominated the economy, worked by enslaved Africans whose labor created wealth for a growing planter class. In contrast, the inland Piedmont and mountain regions were more self-sufficient, relying on small-scale farming, hunting, and local crafts. This duality would influence the colony's culture, politics, and future development for decades. The colony was also shaped by conflict, both internal and external. Native American tribes resisted encroachment, leading to intermittent warfare. European settlers struggled with piracy along the coast, while political tensions with the proprietary government occasionally sparked uprisings. The infamous Culpeper's Rebellion of 1677 to 1678 was one such instance, reflecting the colony's early resistance to distant authority and its growing desire for self-governance. North Carolina's society was deeply stratified. Wealthy landowners and plantation elites wielded significant power, while small farmers, artisans, and laborers navigated a more modest existence. Enslaved Africans played a central role in the economy, their labor fueling the growth of tobacco and rice plantations, while also contributing to the cultural fabric of the colony. African traditions, languages, and practices blended with European and Native American influences, creating a unique and resilient society. By the mid-18th century, North Carolina had become a thriving colony with a growing population. Trade networks extended throughout the Atlantic world, connecting the colony to England, the Caribbean, and beyond. Ports like Wilmington and Beaufort handled ships laden with tobacco, indigo, timber, and naval stores, turning North Carolina into an integral part of the colonial economy. Education, religion, and culture also took root. Anglicanism was the dominant faith, supported by the Church of England, yet dissenting religious groups, Quakers, Presbyterians, and Baptists, found fertile ground in the colony's more remote areas. Schools and academies emerged, and the exchange of ideas began to shape a distinct colonial identity. Yet North Carolina remained a colony on the edge, defined by contrasts between coast and mountains, wealth and poverty, freedom and slavery, settlers and Native Americans. Its rivers were highways for trade, its fields for crops, and its forests for survival. From the Atlantic shores to the Appalachian highlands, the land itself shaped the lives of those who lived there. As the 18th century drew on, North Carolina's strategic importance grew. Its position along the Atlantic seaboard made it a key player in trade, defense, and expansion. It became a place of both opportunity and challenge, a colony poised on the threshold of revolution, identity, and transformation. Through centuries of exploration, settlement, and growth, North Carolina had established itself as a land of promise and resilience. Its people, Native American, European, and African, shaped the state's history with their labor, courage, and adaptation. The rivers, forests, and mountains witnessed the unfolding of a complex story, a story that would continue to evolve as North Carolina moved toward independence, statehood, and its pivotal role in the formation of a new nation. As the 18th century drew to a close, North Carolina stood at a crossroads of change, revolution, and growth. The colony, now brimming with diverse communities and strategic importance, found itself caught in the whirlwind of global conflict, national identity, and local unrest. The American Revolution would become the first major upheaval to define North Carolina, testing its people, its economy, and its political institutions in ways that would echo for generations. By the 1770s, tensions with Great Britain had escalated across the colonies, and North Carolina was no exception. Colonists were frustrated by taxes imposed without representation, restrictions on trade, and perceived abuses of royal authority. From the coastal ports to the Piedmont backcountry, discussions of liberty, rights, and self-governance grew louder. These debates were not just abstract, they involved real communities, where farmers, artisans, merchants, and enslaved people all faced the tangible consequences of imperial policies. The first armed conflicts in North Carolina occurred even before the Declaration of Independence. Local militias organized to resist British authority, often engaging in skirmishes against Loyalist forces who supported the Crown. The Battle of Moores Creek Bridge in 1776 became a defining moment in the state's revolutionary history. Patriot forces, comprised largely of local farmers and militias, decisively defeated a Loyalist contingent, preventing British control of the region and bolstering the revolutionary cause in the South. This early victory energized the population and demonstrated the critical role North Carolina would play in the broader fight for independence. Beyond the battlefield, North Carolina contributed to the revolutionary effort through politics, supplies, and leadership. Figures such as Richard Caswell and William Hooper represented the state in colonial assemblies and later in the Continental Congress, helping to shape the emerging nation. North Carolina was the first colony to officially instruct its delegates to vote for independence, underscoring its commitment to the revolutionary cause. Yet the war also brought internal divisions. Loyalists and patriots often clashed, sometimes violently, creating a civil strife that mirrored the larger conflict across the colonies. The conclusion of the American Revolution did not bring immediate peace or prosperity. The new state faced the immense challenge of building governance structures, establishing law and order, and integrating into the fledgling United States. North Carolina ratified the U.S. Constitution in 1789, becoming the 12th state to join the Union. Its entry was accompanied by debates over federal authority, representation, and the protection of rights, issues that would shape state politics for decades. Economically, North Carolina began to adapt to the new national framework. Agriculture remained the primary occupation, with tobacco, cotton, and corn serving as staple crops. Enslaved labor continued to support the plantation system, particularly in the eastern coastal regions. Meanwhile, the Piedmont and western areas developed smaller farms, mills, and local trade networks. The state's economy remained regionalized, reflecting its diverse geography and population distribution. The 19th century brought both opportunity and conflict. The expansion of infrastructure, including roads, canals, and eventually railroads, connected North Carolina's towns and cities to regional and national markets. Wilmington emerged as a major port, facilitating trade in cotton, naval stores, and agricultural products, while Charlotte and Raleigh began to develop as centers of finance, government, and industry. Railroads allowed the movement of goods and people further inland, promoting settlement and economic integration across the state. Yet North Carolina's social structure and politics were deeply influenced by slavery. By the mid-1800s, the state was divided. The eastern and southern counties relied heavily on enslaved labor, while the western and mountainous regions were largely small-scale, non-slaveholding farms. These divisions shaped political debates, economic policies, and attitudes toward national events, including the contentious question of secession. The Civil War erupted in 1861, and North Carolina found itself once again divided. Initially hesitant to leave the Union, the state ultimately seceded in May 1861, joining the Confederacy after the attack on Fort Sumter and President Lincoln's call for troops. North Carolina became a critical supplier of soldiers, food, and materials for the Confederate cause. More than 125,000 men from the state fought in the war, and battles such as Bentonville and Fort Fisher demonstrated both the strategic importance and the human cost of the conflict. The war devastated North Carolina. Coastal cities like Wilmington and New Bern experienced destruction from Union campaigns, while inland areas suffered from disrupted agriculture and guerrilla raids. Emancipation transformed the social landscape, challenging long-standing hierarchies and forcing communities to navigate the complexities of freedom, labor, and civil rights in a deeply divided society. Reconstruction brought both hope and hardship. Freed African Americans sought education, land, and political participation, establishing schools and churches that would become pillars of community life. North Carolina saw periods of political advancement for black citizens, including the election of African Americans to local and state offices. Yet these gains were met with resistance. The rise of Jim Crow laws, disenfranchisement, and racial violence undermined the promise of equality, creating social and economic challenges that would persist for decades. Despite these obstacles, the late 19th and early 20th centuries marked a period of modernization and industrialization. Textiles became a dominant industry in the Piedmont, with cities like Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and Durham evolving into centers of manufacturing. Tobacco processing, particularly in the Piedmont and coastal regions, transformed local economies and connected North Carolina to national and international markets. Railroads, canals, and improved roads facilitated commerce, migration, and urbanization, creating new opportunities for economic growth. Education and culture also expanded during this period. Universities such as the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and North Carolina State University became centers of learning, research, and innovation. Religious institutions, civic organizations, and cultural movements flourished, reflecting a society in transition, rooted in tradition but increasingly engaged with the modern world. By the mid-20th century, North Carolina had evolved into a state of contrasts. The urban Piedmont was industrialized and growing rapidly, the coastal plains remained agricultural, and the western mountains preserved much of their rural character. Social change, economic opportunity, and political transformation marked this era, setting the stage for North Carolina's role as a leader in industry, education, and civil rights. North Carolina's journey from colonial settlement to modern state is one of resilience and transformation. Its rivers, mountains, and coastlines shaped its development. Its people, Native American, European, and African, defined its culture, and its struggles through revolution, civil war, and social change forged a unique identity. By the early 20th century, North Carolina stood not only as a witness to American history but as a participant, shaping the nation's future while building its own path.